We've got to begin again where I really didn't want to start the show with this. I saw no need to really begin to start the show with this, but it's actually become kind of a thing that must be covered a second time, and that is the Qatari jet, the 747. I got accused yesterday. Some guy, Simple Jack, I guess, he decided that I was accusing President Trump of being willing to be bribed or something. I never said such a thing. If anything, I think Donald Trump has gotten enough gifts in his lifetime. He understands when people are trying to bribe him and trying to persuade him with gifts, and he can stand up to the gift. I think he's smart enough to know that the Qataris are no one gifts you a $400 million aircraft. They want something in return. And we have an aggressive American press corps. Anything we did to tie to the Qataris of this jet, I think the press corps would expose, and Americans could judge for themselves. Did Donald Trump change a significant American policy or not based on a bribe? I think we're all smart enough to know two things here. One, that yes, Qatar is not handing over a $400 million jet without thinking strings can be attached, and also that Donald Trump has been in this rodeo before. He understands they're going to think there are strings attached, and he doesn't have to allow those strings to be attached. It's his choice. The problem is the blood money. And I need to walk you through this because there are some bizarre things being said by people that, well, we would have to strip this plane down and get all the bugs and stuff out. Let me explain to you what's going to happen with this plane. This 747-800 is going to come to the United States. It's going to be handed off to a non-Boeing defense contractor, and it is going to be taken apart piece by piece, rivet by rivet. Why? Because Air Force One has to have the capability of being refueled midair. That's one of the requirements. Air Force One needs to be refueled midair, and so this 747 is going to have its nose altered and rebuilt to be able to be refueled midair like the current 747 used by the president. This 747-800 is going to have bleeding edge government surveillance, satellite, radar, and communication devices installed. That will require taking the plane apart and adding all of those instrumentations. The upper deck of this plane is fitted out to be luxurious. The actual 747 that the president has, the upper deck is reserved for crew. It has all sorts of instruments. The president can launch a war from there if he needs to. That'll have to be retrofitted into the plane. The plane is a plane where you're going to have all sorts of disassembling and reassembling and attaching new things. So the idea that there's going to be surveillance in there and we're not going to find it is nonsense. The idea that somehow Qatar could fit something in it to control the plane is nonsense. The idea they could blow it up is nonsense. The surveillance and listening devices, it's all nonsense. A lot of the hysteria about the plane isn't so. Here, however, is the legitimate point about this plane. Donald Trump himself has said Qatar is an entity, a country, a nation that funds terrorism. It's not in dispute. Yes, we have a military base in Qatar, and somehow some people are saying, oh, this is justification for this. It's not. Just because we have a military base there, we back in the day had these brilliant relations with China. We would regularly dock. We would regularly send our Navy over to China to hang out with them, things like that. The Chinese were never our friends. We deluded ourselves into thinking our friends. If anything, we've done the same thing with Qatar that we've done with China. And Qatar is now doing what China used to do, funding Confucius Institutes. Qatar is now dropping boatloads of cash on American universities, influencing their opinions, their research, and the students who get access to the university from abroad. We know for certain Qatar has funded anti-Semitic protesters in the Ivy League, and we know for certain Qatar has funded groups tied to terrorists. But we also know for certain Qatar has funded terrorist organizations that murder Americans. Here's the thing. I trot out rarely, but I will now, the if Barack Obama or Joe Biden did this rule. The people who are defending this right now would be enraged if Barack Obama or Joe Biden were gifted a 747 from a nation that funded the murder of Americans. And I, as an American, before I am a conservative, before I am a Republican, before I am a Donald Trump voter, before I am anything else, I, as an American, cannot stomach the idea of the President of the United States flying on a plane that was purchased with the same funds used to murder American citizens. And that's the bottom line for me. It's not the gift that outrages me. It's not the bribe. It's not the impropriety or the appearance of impropriety. It's not the supposed accusations of corruption being made by the media. It's Qatar, and I'm not going to call it gutter. I'm not going to call it gutter. It's Qatar. It was Qatar when I was a kid. It's Qatar now. In the same way, I'll probably say Gulf of Mexico because I don't get into newspeak. I don't do it for the left. I'm not going to do it for the right. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to say people's pronouns. I'm not going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico because it's been the Gulf of Mexico for over 300 years. And I'm not going to call Qatar gutter. If I wanted to call it gutter, I would have been born in Qatar as a Muslim, but I'm not. I'm a white American Christian conservative Republican who voted for Donald Trump and don't like the idea of Donald Trump flying on a plane that was purchased with the same money used to murder Americans. I think it's a problem. It's not that they can bribe him. I think he's smart enough to see it. It's not that this is corrupting. I think he's smart enough to avoid it. It's the plane from Qatar. If it was Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain, I wouldn't have a problem. I'd say good for them. The president needs a 747. The current one is about 40 years old. Boeing can't get its act together. It's Qatar. And that should matter to you. And here's something I've noticed in the last 24 hours, 48 now. Some of the president's most vocal supporters are bothered by this. But online, there are a bunch of very small accounts that are perfectly fine with it and see it perfectly reasonable. And here's the thing. We know that Qatar funds online social media influence operations. That's something else we know about Qatar. And so I don't find it odd at all that a bunch of new or dormant Twitter accounts have sprung to life in the last 48 hours. Very small number of followers, oftentimes less than 1,000 followers, oftentimes less than 500 followers, and they're all on board trying to rationalize taking a blood money jet from Qatar. Some of the president's most prominent supporters, Laura Loomer and others, even they're like, we should not be taking a jet from a country that has paid to murder Americans. I understand the president wants a new plane. I get it. And if it were Saudi Arabia, if it was the United Arab Emirates, if it was Bahrain, if it was Egypt, if it was Israel, if it was any other nation other than maybe China or Russia, I'd say no big deal. But there are two countries on the planet that have paid to murder Americans, and that is Qatar and Iran. I wouldn't want a plane from Iran. Don't want a plane from Qatar. I know the president wants a plane, but this also comes at a time the president is telling Americans that they don't need 30 dolls, just two. They don't need 200 pencils, one's fine. And so maybe he doesn't need a 747-800 from Qatar when he's got two perfectly fine 747 200s right now or 300s right now. Maybe he can forego the blood money plane because it is a blood money plane. So many of the narratives, though, are wrong, and so many of the narratives seeded by the media, this is a security risk. The Washington Post actually has a story today that it's a big security risk. No, it's not. It's not a security risk because this plane is going to be taken down to the rivets by a defense contractor and rebuilt in the form and fashion of Air Force One. They're going to be able to get into the nuts and bolts of it. They're going to get into the computer systems. They're going to get into all of that. The scenario that this is somehow a security risk for the president when a defense contractor is going to retrofit it as Air Force One is a nonsensical story. But here's the thing. Many of the media outlets that are using those stories, the bribery, the corruption, the security risk stuff, are outlets that have gotten money from Qatar and are not telling the story about Qatar funding terrorists. Qatar has poured a ton of money into the United States in an influence operation. They buy bots on social media. They buy social media influencer accounts. They pay off colleges and universities. They put Pam Bondi, for God's sakes, on a lobbyist contract. They were paying her $119,000 a month for over a year because she had access to Donald Trump and could talk to him about Qatar. She was a lobbyist for an organization and her chief client was Qatar. That's documented. They buy off politicians of both parties and they are a dangerous rogue regime in sympathies to Hamas and Iran, and we coddle them because we have a base there. We think they have strategic influence and they're using their money to kill Americans, and now they're gifting the President of the United States this plane. I think that's wrong. I understand his desire to take the plane and to want the plane, but I also understand the desire of parents who want to get their kids a big Christmas and the president's telling them to sacrifice for the good of the country. I think maybe the president should sacrifice for the good of the country and not take a plane purchased by a regime that pays for the murder of Americans. I don't fault him wanting the new plane. Boeing is at issue here. I can't for the life of me understand why we've given Boeing the contract to build the new sixth generation fighter jet. They can't get a 737 off the ground, let alone Air Force One. How are they going to get the strategic fighter off the ground? They can't even get their rocket ships to take off and go to the moon anymore. And yet we gave them this contract? Guys, this is not a good look for President Trump. I don't worry about him being corrupted by it. I don't worry about the bribery allegations. That's all the stuff the media is pouring on. I just think the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, Mr. America First, Make America Great Again, shouldn't fly on a plane that was funded by a royal family that pays to murder Americans. That's the bottom line here. You feel free to disagree, but I'm hard-pressed to rationalize the look of a president getting on a plane funded with that sort of money. I don't think it's a good look. Particularly when he tells us to sacrifice right now for the good of the country. I think maybe the president should rethink this. I don't know that he's going to rethink this, but I think he should rethink this. I think this isn't good. I think the president himself in his first term called out Qatar as a funder of terrorism that has cost the lives of Americans. And I just think this is a bad idea. I don't think it's going to be bugged. I don't think it's going to be booby-trapped. I don't think it's going to be bombed. I don't think any of those nightmare scenarios people are circulating online. It's going to be retrofitted by a defense contractor. It's going to be lots of stuff added to it. It's going to be taken down basically to the rivets and rebuilt. But you can't rebuild the fact that this plane was purchased by a country that has also used its money to murder Americans. That's wrong and why the president should not take this plane.